Hello, everyone. My name is Alexander Lucard, and I am an HMIS administrator for Montgomery County. In today's training, we're going to look at what happens when you transfer a client from one program or agency to another. Now, one of the things we've noticed here in Montgomery County is that program A will think program B is going to do aspects of the transfer, and program B will think program A is doing aspects, and thus a lot of the information that should be done upon a transfer is getting dropped. No one's doing it. So we just wanted to do a quick rehash of what you're supposed to do when there is a transfer so that you know whether you are the agency transferring the client or getting the transfer, what your role and what your responsibilities are. In this case, we're going to use a test client on the training site, Nick Aldis, and we've already got him set up with his current program, which is Rapid Rehousing Singles HSP Catholic Charities, and we're going to transfer him into a permanent housing program. Now, the aspects that you do here for a transfer is the same no matter what you're doing. So if you're going from PATH to a shelter, or a shelter to rapid rehousing, or street outreach to HIP, no matter what, it's going to be the same tasks that you have to do when you're transferring a client. The type of program doesn't matter. The work and the workflow is still the same. So let's get into it and let's show you what we need to do. First up is Catholic Charities. They're going to be transferring the client over, and there are two things that you want to do. Now, the first is going to be having that exit date in mind. Remember, this is the date that the client exits your program. And you really aren't supposed to be in more than one of a program type at a time. So if you're going from, say, one HIP program to another, make sure that there's no overlaps, just like you would for income or non-cash benefits or anything like that. We don't want any date overlaps. We never want date overlaps in HMIS. But what we want to do before we hand Nick over to his new program and check him out is make sure that the information in the account is correct. So we're going to say that this transfer is happening on May 23rd, 2022. May 23rd, 2022. So the first thing we want to do is go in and let's go look at his account. Let's go look at his entry exits. He's been in the program for about 15 months. And we can see that only one interim is done, and that interim was done on 4/6. So right away, this shows me that there has been a lot of work done on this client. Again, this is a fake client. I know the Catholic Charities wouldn't let a client go 15 months without having the information corrected or updated. This is just a test client. It's not a real client. So don't think that this is an actual thing that is bad. In real life, if this happened, yes, this would be bad because this client has been updated since, 13 months. So here's a couple things that we know right away. First of all, his annual assessment was never done. So there should have been an annual assessment on 2/14/2022. You need to get that done before you check him out. As well, since he hasn't been updated in 13 months, we do want to go in and take a look at his last interim. We click on that, we click on the pencil, we're just going to hit save and continue and see what the information looked like the last time he was updated. And again, since the training site, it defaults to an old PIT, what we're going to do is on the real live site, it would update to this, the update screen, and we would take a look at all the different things that aren't done. So the housing move-in date is blank. This means that Nick never actually moved in, never got leased up. If that's what a blank housing move-in date means. So if Nick was supposed to actually have been housed at this point, there should be a housing move-in date in there, right? So you want to do a housing move-in date interim. We can also see that the client contact information is missing, which isn't good. We need to have some client contact information in. So before Catholic Charities hands him off, we want to get that filled in. Another thing we notice here is with the monthly income. Now notice it was updated on 4/6. That's what that one interim was, which is great. That's what you're supposed to do. But it's now 13 months later. And as we all know, SSI, SSDI, and food stamps all go up in January. So we can see that there are 3 interims, 2 definite, 3 possible that are missing. A housing move-in date interim, that annual assessment, and a January interim when his SSI should have gone up or gone down depending. So right now we can already see that there's a bunch of things that you have to do here. Same with disabilities, non-cash benefits. We would just look through and make sure that everything looks correct. But as we can see here, that housing move-in date Just his income has not been updated in time. And we're also missing the client contact information. So really, we want to get a couple different interims in. Now, how do we handle this? In a perfect world, we should have done those 3 interims when they happened. The housing move-in date interim when it happened, the monthly income when it happened, and the annual assessment when it happened. So you need to make sure all this is done before you hand over the client. Why? Because they need to have this information. And then that's going to make more work for them. You wouldn't want a client to be handed off to you with poor data. And so you shouldn't be doing the same. So in this case, what we want to do is make sure that all this gets cleaned up. So there should be 3 interims in here. Again, it would be a housing move-in date interim, an annual assessment, and an income when it went up in January or went down, depending on how the SSI goes. So let's put these in now. All right, we're going to do the first one. Let's say that he moved in on August 17th, 2020. So we're going to do our housing move-in date interim. Close out of that. We're going to do our income update interim. And let's say he went up to 650. And remember, you should know how to do these interims already. We're not going to go over how to do a housing move-in date interim. We're not going to go over how to do an income interim. Those are all separate videos. And by the time you get to this, you should know how to do that. So we're just going to whip through these because, again, you should know how to do these already. And then finally, the annual assessment interim. And then we're done. Now the client has all their information updated correctly and how they should have been. So the client is ready to be exited out from this program. So we can go do that now. We can go exit the client out. Now we're going to exit them out for May 23rd, 2022. Now, remember that this is going to be because we don't want any overlap. So let's actually check him out on the 22nd. And then we're going to put in what, because again, we don't want overlap. He's going to be going from one permanent housing, rapid rehousing to a different one, a PSH program. So you can only be in one program at a time, according to HUD standards, one program type. And rapid rehousing counts as a permanent housing program, the same as OPH, PH, or PSH. So we do want to make sure that there's no date overlap. So let's get the reason for leaving it. And in this case, there's a couple different options we could do. Completed program, left for housing opportunity, or needs cannot be met. It just depends on why the transfer is occurring. In this case, we're just going to say, he's leaving for housing opportunity. And we will say rental by client with other ongoing subsidy. We had save and continue. And then what we want to do is we want to double check one last time the exit. We need to make sure that all of this information is correct before we hand the client off, because the last thing you want as the agency giving the client to a different agency is that second agency coming to myself, Beza, or Ashley and saying, hey, they didn't do this correctly, because we will make note of it. We'll look at the account. We'll be like, why didn't you do this? We even made you a video, a long PowerPoint. We've had talks about this. Why didn't you finish this client off correctly before handing them over? That's not cool. So make sure that you have all of this correct. And as you see, we've already done it. We filled in all those different things that Nick was missing. So he's good to go. We can hand him off to the new agency. We hit save and exit. And there we go. And now let's pretend I'm the new agency. We're going to do Interfaith Homes HUD. We're going to choose him as the agency the Catholic Charities is handing him off to. So he's going from rapid rehousing to a permanent housing program. Type, of course, is HUD. And then we want our start date. Now remember, project start date is the date that they agree to join your program, not necessarily the date that they lease up. That's the housing move-in date. So we're going to say that the transfer is going to occur on May 23rd. Now, there might be some overlap here, and it's okay, because when we say that they're not supposed to be in a program, that means they shouldn't be housed in two different programs of the same type at once. So we do want to keep away from having that there to be overlap, but sometimes it's going to happen because maybe he agrees to join your program, on May 1st, right? So there's 3 weeks of overlap where he's moving out of rapid rehousing into Interfaith. It can happen, but most of the time when you're handing off a client, that start date is going to be the date after they exit because that's their official transfer date. But again, it can happen because the project start date is the date that they agree to join your program. So while in a perfect world, there won't be any overlap between the exit date from program A and the start date of program B, it might not happen. It all just depends on when they agree to join your program, how long the transfer takes, is the client digging his heels in, does something weird happen that prolongs the process. So even if we start this on, say, March 1st or May 1st, and the exit date there is May 22nd, it's okay because we're really looking at the housing move-in date as the date where we don't want there to be overlaps. That's the primary one. Of course, again, in a perfect world, the exit date from program A and the project start date from program B won't overlap. But as we've seen here, it can happen because the project start date, once again, I know I'm hammering this home, but it's important, is the date they agree to join your program. And because of that, although we don't want there to be overlap, it can and probably will happen at times. So we're going to start him on May 1st, and we're going to hit save and continue. And now Interfaith Works is going to look through all this information and make sure that it looks right. Because just because you receive a client from a previous program does not mean that they put in the information correctly or that they put in the information at all. So if I'm Interfaith Works here and I'm looking through this transfer client, I'm just going to double check everything. I'm going to look at each line of this and make sure that the information is correct. Again, your intake sheet, when they come into your program, should be each one of these questions in this order. And you should be able to quickly scan it and make sure that everything matches. If it doesn't, you need to make changes. So for example, let's say on the intake sheet, it says, yes, I do have a disabling condition. He didn't mark it at Catholic Charities for whatever reason, or they didn't enter it in the system. It's been, 15 months. So maybe he developed it while he was at rapid rehousing and they just didn't get it. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to say that he has a physical disability, but as you can see, when he comes into the system, all the previous answers say no. So how do we correct this, right? You need to make sure when a client enters your program, whether it's a transfer or not, that all of this is correct. So you need to go through this line by line. So let's do this. Does the client have a disabling condition? We're going to say yes. And remember, he came into the program on May 1st. So we're going to end the old physical. And we're going to start a new one. And that way it matches because we're ending the old one the day before he joined your program. Because maybe he didn't tell Catholic Charities he had a physical disability, but he did tell you guys, you at Interfaith Works. So both can be true because oftentimes it's self-reported. So we see here, we fix the disabilities. Now, another thing that people forget to do when a client comes into the program is fix the prior living situation and length of stay. Why? Because this prior living in jail and staying in jail for over a year was true for Catholic Charities. It's not true for Interfaith Works because they were handed this client off. This is true before he came into rapid rehousing. But because the client is transferring, because the client is coming from a different program, we want to update where his prior living situation was before he came in to Interfaith Works, program B. So we're going to update this. We're going to say rental by client with rapid rehousing or other equivalent subsidy. And how long was he there? 1 year or more, because he was in a rapid rehousing program. But remember, he joined it in August, so you might not know that. You just would take a look at the, how long was he in rapid rehousing. But remember, we gave him a move-in date of August. So you might end up choosing 1 year or more if you're looking at the project start date, or you might choose 90 days but less than 1 year if you actually look at the housing move-in date. Either one's going to be correct. Just depends on which you're going off by. Normally, this is going to be what the client puts down. So go by what the client puts on his intake sheet. It's safer that way because you might not have contact with the transferring agency or where they were before. And then again, income. As you see, we already updated the income, but imagine if we hadn't updated the income before he came into the program, if Catholic Charities hadn't done it, then you, Agency B, Interfaith Works, would have had to do all this update yourself. And that's not cool because the previous agency should have got it. And you would have had to do the 650 change and things like that. But because they've already done it, it's less work for you. They did a handoff correctly. But if they hadn't done the 650, you would have had to go in and make this change. Same with non-cash benefits or anything like that. Right? We would go through all of this. Still has Medicaid. And then we come down to this. This is the most important part, and this is where the most mistakes are made with the transferring client or a client that has come from a previous program. The old housing move-in date is still in there. This is the Catholic Charities move-in date. He moved in on August 17th, 2021. Now, this does not correspond to your new program, Agency B, Interfaith Works. This is Catholic Charities housing move-in date. If Interfaith Works leaves this in, their housing move-in date is going to be like -8-9 months, because remember, the system is going to add the dates together to find how long it takes to go from project start date to housing move-in date. In this case, the housing move-in date is before the project start date, giving you a negative score. So it will say, oh, well, that's clearly an error. They haven't filled this out correctly. We're going to mark this person as not housed. So the first thing you want to do when you get a transferring client in is remove the old housing move-in date so that you can do a correct housing move-in date interim of your own. Do not keep the old housing move-in date from the previous program. If you see it in here, just wipe it out like we just did here. And then we're just going to hit save. We've saved everything. And especially with the housing move-in date, this maintains, there we go. There's the old housing move-in date of 8/17, and then we removed it for when he came into the program. Now, if the client is currently housed when they move in to your program, you're going to create a housing move-in date interim. If they aren't housed, it's just going to be blank like this to say, nope, they're not actually housed. They're not leased up. Remember, if they are housed, we're going to do a housing move-in date interim with the date that they are housed, even if it is the same date that they came into your program. So Nick comes into our program already housed. He was housed by Rapid Rehousing. He's staying there just for whatever reason. So what we wanted to do is do a housing move-in date interim. And then we're going to put in our new housing move-in date of 5/1/2022, which is going to say that there's a 0 difference, right? It's going to be a 0 difference between his move-in date and his project start date, which means that the system will read that he was already housed when he came into your program. So as you can see, there's the old housing move-in date from Catholic Charities. We blanked it out when he first came into the program to say, hey, we're starting over because we don't want to have a negative score on our housing move-in date. We want to actually have the client count as housed. And then we do a housing move-in date interim where it has the same date as his project start date because he comes into the program housed. Remember that housing move-in date is so important. We have one agency where 2/3 of their clients, they didn't actually fix this when the clients transferred over. So 2/3 of their clients don't count as housed, which is terrible for them, terrible for us. So please make sure you do this housing move-in date correction when a client is transferred to you. It is so important. It is so vital to your clients being counted as housed. You have to be careful. You have to be thorough when a client comes from another program into yours. But now we've made all the corrections. We've got that new housing move-in date interim. We've fixed that disabilities. We've double checked and saw the Catholic Charities updated all the client's information and it matches our intake sheet. So we're good. We can scroll out. We can hit save and exit. And here we can see that the client has been handed off correctly. Catholic Charities did their work and they handed it off, and Interfaith did their due diligence when they got the client. Instead of assuming that the work was done correctly, they double checked, they made corrections when needed, especially with that housing move-in date. And now the client is fully transferred and ready to go with his new agency. That's all there is to it. You just have to have an eye for detail and double check everything before the handoff occurs. So important, and you need to make sure you do it, especially that housing move-in date, especially that prior living situation. That's all I've got for you today. Thank you for joining me for this training, and I look forward to doing more trainings with you in the future. Have a great day.